Anybody have any questions? Yes, in the back. If you could identify yourself too, please.
I'd actually like to make some statements. First of all,
I'd rather a question actually, because
okay.
people. If you could identify yourself,
yes,
please.
Yes, my name is Judy Carson. I'm a retired consular officer from the
Okay.
State Department and worked in the consular fraud, visa passport fraud division as well. I don't know who you all in the audience are, but I want to thank CIS for actually bringing this very serious problem up, because there are a lot of vulnerabilities in the immigration system. And there are so many vulnerabilities that what happens is even the talk of amnesty fuels more illicit facilitation networks, not just smuggling and trafficking, but of course possibility for terrorism. It's a broken system, and a lot needs to be done. So I encourage people to talk with you all, as well as us retired consular and DHS officers, because we are the ones that Congress should be asking to staff a working task force to provide them options on how to fix the system, because there are ways to fix the system. But it's scary. A lot of my colleagues are very, very upset for years over what's been allowed to happen as our immigration system just falls apart completely. And why is this important? It's important because us U.S. taxpayers, our hardworking, struggling U.S. taxpayers, are subsidizing foreigners who scam the system. Birthright citizenship is a big scam. Look at our hospitals. Look at how they're going bankrupt, because any foreigner who wants to come to this country any way they can, on a visa or illegally, can have a baby in this country on taxpayer dime, and then ask for a waiver on humanitarian reasons to stay. I mean, it's crazy. It's a scam. Look at the numbers of people in schools who are from other countries now. I mean, my guess is that the illegal population, and I include overstays on that, and included people who are legally working in the United States not paying taxes, is probably over 25 million. And we are also subsidizing very wealthy foreigners who come and launder their money, buy $1-million condos in Miami, and they're not paying their fair share of taxes. We're subsidizing them. It's nuts. So anyway, please keep doing your work. If you want to know about the visa system, please ask me or these folks. I'll be happy to explain it. And one more thing. Congress should be representing the people who they were elected to represent, which are U.S. citizens. They need to demand more information from state and DHS on the number of illegals and what's going on. We need to do something about it.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Yeah. Yes. Don.
Yeah.
Well, here, wait for the mic.
Okay. I am. Thank you. I'm co-chairman of FAIR's National Advisory Board, and I've listened to this a wonderful panel, and of course, just the wonderful comments made from the back of the room, which certainly underline my concern. My question was going to be to Jessica Vaughn, who's done such brilliant work with her writings, is how many illegals are here, and I think we've already had an estimate. It certainly isn't 11 million, and what you're saying, Jessica, we're talking about 250,000 every year that get added to that, and maybe that's a modest number. I don't know. That's my question.
Well, if I could, I'll take that one. We've actually looked at this a lot. I mean, this is, it may not be 11, it may be 12, it may be 13. It can't be more than that. It literally cannot be, because we know we know how many people are born here. We're able to match the estimates that they have of the illegal population with this administrative data from the schools, from death records, from birth records. So it could be off. I mean, our estimates of 11 or 12 million could be a million off either way. It's possible.
You don't think the 25 is?
Yeah, it's literally impossible. I mean, it cannot. It just can't be. No, this is just people who are illegal immigrants, not the children of that. And it's yeah. This is just illegal.
What will help is if Congress actually gets the Overstay report that it's been demanding for so many years, at least we will have a much better idea of the share, or at least the number of visa overstays, which we simply have not been able to
That little lady that was
estimate.
testifying the other day was like a deer in the headlight when they got asked the question, well, how many overstays are there? And I don't know.
Well, the thing is DHS does know. It just hasn't disclosed it to Congress or the public.
Well, even they don't know that well. I mean,
but they have,
they know better than they're telling us.
right, and they'd know even better if they would implement the biometric entry-exit tracking. But they know more than they're saying, and it's important that this information be available to officers so that we have some empirical basis for making the decisions that they have to make every year.
Okay, one more
day.
comment, and this is obvious, as the fact that neither party wants to fix the system. And I've done writing on this. The externality party, the parties that ruin the coal fields down in West Virginia and pass that along to the taxpayer, that's what an externality is. But these parties, both parties, want to keep the system going, and basically that's what they're doing. And basically, if we don't fix it, it'll just keep going the same way. Sorry to say that.
Has it ever not been that way?
I had actually,
I think you're right, Don, absolutely.
I had a question specifically about the screening issue, probably mainly for you, Don, although maybe Jessica has something to say about it. And this is specifically about the screening as opposed to the fraud detection part. The screening is only going to be as good as the data entered into the tools that you use to screen people. I mean, a screen doesn't do, if you think of an actual screen, it doesn't do any good if the holes are this big. The flies just fly through them. Well, in the metaphorical screen like this, if we have no idea what we're screening for, then there's a limit to how effective it is, isn't it? I mean, in a sense, isn't screening as we're doing it now sort of like the drunk looking for his keys under the streetlight because that's where the light is best? Anyway, I mean, I'm not attacking the idea. I'm just saying, aren't there
I'd have to
limits
think
to
about
it?
that analogy. Might need a drink or two
Okay.
before we draw conclusions.
The bar's right here.
But actually, I mean, even looking at the Syrian refugee process, CIS has
That's
probably...
USCIS. So.
Oh, I'm sorry. USCIS, I believe, has improved the screening process 1,000-fold pre-911. They have a very sound background check process, and it's improved since I left. I know that for a fact. It is true that the refugee screening is the best. It's superior. It's even more enhanced than the non-refugee applicants, primarily because you're talking about a different population of individuals, and more specifically, people who are outside the country, so you don't have Privacy Act and other limitations and issues. Also, the systems, whether you call it a suite of other government agency systems or whatever, it is much more enhanced from an intelligence, law enforcement vetting data set, if you will. So it is good. Now, I also give credit to USCIS Refugee and Affairs Division, because I understand they've also inserted a new review process at headquarters before they allow cases to be interviewed. So they're now being reviewed and vetted internally before a case is even interviewed. So I think that's great. But where it breaks is you have the senior official of this country's law enforcement agency, the FBI, and the senior law enforcement official of the entire intelligence community saying, I have a concern. And I have a concern that we don't have access to the Syrian databases and data sets that we have had and normally have for refugee processing because of the current state of affairs in Syria and the Mideast in general. So we have a concern that you're going to be admitting refugees that we really can't vet from an intelligence perspective. I would say, of course I'm biased, I was the architect and the first director of fraud detection and national security. If I were the president, I would listen to those individuals. Because to me, it's about risk management. And while you can talk about risk management with benefit fraud, at least the risk, if you're wrong, is they get the benefit because the overwhelming majority are not threats to national security and public safety. Okay? But in this scenario, where you have the ISIL threat, you have the promised infiltration of the refugee process, you have increasing number of terrorists being identified that had abused the refugee process. And if you're wrong, the consequence is hundreds, if not thousands, of lives. To me, I'd be a little concerned about that lack of ability to vet. Because a good analogy is you're going to have a certain percentage of fraud get by. So as we've learned in the benefit fraud assessment, it's just a rough number. If you assume there's that 20% fraud rate, that 80% of the people are entitled to the benefit and get it. So if you have 20% or even 10 that aren't, and that's the fraud you catch if you do the assessments and the site visits. There's also the fraud you don't catch, okay? So it's actually much higher. So our fraud assessments were always very low side, minimum fraud levels, okay? When you get into the national security arena and you look at that, there is no doubt in my mind that the individuals you're dealing with are better trained and better prepared for an interview to infiltrate this country than the regular fraudsters, if you will. So if 20% or so get by the regular interviews, you're going to have at least a similar amount, if not larger, of trained terrorists get by the interview process. That's what concerns me, okay? Now, I'm retired. I can profile. I can use risk management. I don't have to be politically correct, okay? But I administered benefits programs for years. I'm an associate commissioner in charge of benefits program. I'm all about immigration in a legal, controlled manner, okay? But here's one that I have to really caution what's being done today with the refugees. I'm not saying don't let Muslims in this country. For God's sake, I don't believe that. I think it's wrong. But I think there's a percentage of refugees, lower risk. We should risk manage the refugee program, okay, to minimize the risk because we're talking about human lives.
Thank you, Don.
Can I just
yeah,
say
sure,
one thing
please,
about,
yeah.
to go back to your analogy about the drunk looking for his keys under the light because that's where the light is? That, I think, is a perfect analogy. What the benefit fraud assessments and visa fraud assessments and overstay reports and other empirical data, what we learn from studying the problem tells us drunks where the keys are. But we still need human officers in adequate numbers to have eyes to be able to deal with these applications. It's not enough to just do automated checks against lists of known terrorists and databases and so on. We have to have human interaction in order to effectively evaluate or investigate any of these applications. And that's why the staffing levels are so important as well. We can't let technology is not the only answer to this problem. There has to be a human element too.
And I think we even may disagree to a certain degree here, because I think in today's world where the numbers are much larger, the threat is much bigger, we really need to get away from the same old way of doing things, okay? The traditional law enforcement methods of arresting and detaining and placing in removal proceedings, ordering them deported, they never leave. I mean, we need to get away from that. We need to think more smartly, and I think technology is the primary platform to do this, okay? We need to have laws and policies and operations that encourage compliance with the law, that hold people accountable for not violating the law. And I don't mean hold them accountable for, physical reasons, arresting, detaining, and removing. I don't mean that way. But if you break the law, you cannot obtain any benefit while you are in this country. No waivers, no exceptions. We've gone to extremes to come up with waivers and exceptions to get around visa numbers, to get around ineligibilities. I mean, we got to wake up as a government in what we're trying to do if we want to control immigration. And this goes back to my point, have we ever not done it? Immigration, as we all know, is very politicized, and it varies from administration to administration and party to party. And do they really have a stomach to control immigration? I'll even go a little further. Do they really have a clue what it would take to really reform the immigration laws? And I'll tell you right now, no. The number of congressmen and senators that truly understand the totality, you could count on maybe both hands. Okay, and when you talk to them, they just have their area, their issue, their selfishness. That's what it is. But if you really wanted to fix this, technology is a key platform, and the laws, You encourage compliance, you penalize for not complying. You have to be outside the country to apply for a benefit if you violated your status. You got to pay a fine before you do it. And you watch how many people stop coming, how many start complying with the law, and how many start leaving. Okay, you need a system that does that. And now here's where I go with technology. I think because, say, 80% of the people are law-abiding, or at least, I mean, there are law-abiding people now that kind of slide a little bit more on the non-law-abiding side because their current systems and process encourages illegal immigration, doesn't hold anybody accountable, okay? So it's natural for people to just not fear overstaying their visit. That's why it probably exceeds 40%, the overstay rate, all right? But if we use technology, we realize that percentage, you don't need to interview. Go back to risk management. Take the Trusted Traveler program. CBP has a number of Trusted Traveler programs. Once you have your biometrics collected, you're vetted, you're determined to be admissible, you can enter the country, the system. Supposedly, the theory here is the arrival departure database, the overstay database manages your coming in and departing. Hey, and as long as you come and go, you're not arrested, you don't overstay your visit, you leave when you're supposed to, you can continue to come and go. Don't even need a visa. Exception, we'll go into the visa waiver program that Congress thinks it's fixing, okay? But you go into the visa waiver program, there are certain countries considered hostile to the United States. There are certain known countries for years, even since I was an associate commissioner, when I was responsible for air, sea, and land border ports of entry, you have overstay rates that exceed the percentage that the country should have been penalized and not allowed to continue to issue visas. You need laws that you enforce. Okay? But if you use technology and you effectively monitor people and you hold them accountable, you don't have to lock them up, you don't have to order them or detain them or remove them. Just make it difficult to stay here. Goes back to your students. If you drop out of school, the system's going to track it. The school's not going to be authorized to readmit you. You got to leave the country. You got to start all over again. You can't work if you're, you know. And then, of course, the bigger system, you need national mandate for E-Verify, and you need to collect the biometrics on everyone, foreign nationals in the country. So I think this can be done. And I don't think everybody needs to be interviewed. But I will agree with you wholeheartedly that when you risk manage and you identify the population that is a risk, then there's nothing better than in-person contact. Nothing better, and I can tell you as a former immigration inspector, adjudicator, et cetera, that I can sit someone in front of me and interview them for a benefit and within minutes tell you if there's fraud. In fact, a lot of times, just from walking the individuals from the waiting room to my office for the interview, I pretty much have a hunch, okay? You train people, there's nothing better than in-person interviews. And as far as the State Department is concerned, we work very closely with their fraud prevention program. The consular officers in specific countries they're the most knowledgeable of that environment and that culture and that area. That's absolutely essential. Now, when it comes to marriage cases, including fiancé, I looked at that case with the Sam Barnett, and I'll be honest with you, I'm not really sure. I think it was some sloppy work, but I'm not sure even the background check process today would have flagged that case unless social media was authorized, which is something I tried to push through, but it hasn't been authorized yet for adjudicators and FDNS officers. But I do believe that limited interviews, high risk, but on all marriage and fiancé cases because of the fraud rates, okay? That becomes a high-risk area. You definitely want to interview. You have a policy that mandates the interview and control the exceptions as opposed to the reverse, which is what's going on now.
Thank you, Don. One last quick question because we need to respect people's time.
I just wanted to return real briefly, Don, to your comments on refugees. It kind of sounds like, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it kind of sounds like you might be advocating a pause in bringing in refugees.
I think pause is a very good word. It's a very light word, but yeah, I wouldn't shut it down completely. I would incorporate, in fact, if I could go back, one of the things I recommend to Congress is that they legislate the requirement that the FBI and the intelligence community co-lead a work group with other agencies such as within state and CIS and ICE, the development of a standard national security check. Because right now, a national security check means different things to different agencies. It's not identical. Before I retired, even the State Department advisory process, the background check process for refugees, and the CIS process, and for refugees, the thinking, the mindset, the processes were different. So if I had the authority, I would say FBI, DNI, CIA, Department, DOD, whatever, get together, define what a national security check is, what are all the databases, what are all the data sets that need to be checked, and who are the sign-offs. And I will incorporate in there that any information pertaining to a national security threat has to be further evaluated and issued a level or some sort of clearance by that particular intelligence or law enforcement agency. Because CIS is not the expert in that regard. CIS has a great screening process, but it's only as good as the data and the custodians of that data. So you need the intelligence and the enforcement world doing that. That's what I would build into the Syrian and other processes for security.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. We're going to have the video of this event online next week, probably. The packets have some of the information that people have been talking about, and feel free to come up and accost them afterwards. And thanks for coming, and hope to see you next time.